Do not think about what you want most right now. Whatever came to mind just now, that is not a coincidence. That is a mechanism. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why it happened. But only if you watch until the end. This content is exclusive. And it is running out. You just felt something. A small pull. Maybe skepticism. Maybe curiosity. Maybe both. That feeling has a name. Brehm described it in 1966. It is older than any platform that has ever tried to use it against you. This episode is about psychological reactance. The mechanism that makes forbidden things desirable, imposed things repellent, and censorship almost always counterproductive. And it is about why the opening of this video worked on you, even though you knew it was working. Jack Brehm was a social psychologist at Duke University. In 1966, he published a theory of psychological reactance. The central premise is precise. Human beings believe they have a set of free behaviors. Things they can do, have done, and expect to be able to do in the future. When any of those freedoms is threatened or eliminated, a motivational state is activated. An unpleasant arousal directed at restoring the lost freedom. Brehm called this state reactance. It is not a personality trait. It is a situational response. It activates in almost everyone, under the right conditions. The three signatures of reactance are consistent across decades of research. The restricted behavior becomes more attractive. The imposed behavior becomes less attractive. And the source of the restriction becomes a target of hostility. Not logical hostility. Automatic hostility. The kind that precedes any evaluation of whether the restriction was reasonable. Brehm's original experiments involved consumer choices. Participants were shown a set of products and asked to rate their preferences. Then one product was made unavailable. The unavailable product was rated higher after the restriction than it had been before. Not because it had changed. Because access to it had been threatened. A second experiment involved candy bars given to children. 2 candy bars, identical in every measurable way. One was placed within easy reach. The other was placed behind a barrier. The children consistently preferred the candy bar behind the barrier. The barrier was not about scarcity. There were plenty of both. The barrier was about perceived restriction of freedom. The magnitude of reactance is not constant. It scales with 2 variables: how important the threatened freedom is to the person, and how large the threat is perceived to be. A minor inconvenience produces minor reactance. A direct elimination of something central to a person's identity or daily life produces intense reactance. When the United States raised the legal drinking age from 18 to 21 in the 1980s, researchers tracked consumption patterns in college students. Students who were newly below the legal age drank significantly more than students who had been below the legal age before the law changed. The restriction activated reactance in the group whose freedom had just been taken away. The same dynamic appears in public health. Warning labels on cigarette packages were introduced with the expectation that they would reduce consumption. Research published in the Journal of Consumer Psychology found that in certain populations, particularly those who scored high on trait reactance, warning labels increased the appeal of the restricted product. The label intended to reduce harm activated a mechanism that increased desire. Not in everyone, but reliably in people for whom the freedom to make their own choice was central to identity. This is the first important implication of reactance theory for anyone trying to change behavior. Restricting something does not automatically reduce the desire for it. It often amplifies it. Subscribe. This channel exists for exactly the kind of thinking you are doing right now. Now, the piece of the research that most discussions of reactance skip entirely. In 2019, researchers published a study across 4 experiments examining a specific question. Does reactance operate differently when the restriction targets behavior versus when it targets thought? The assumption behind most persuasion campaigns is that changing what people think is easier than changing what they do. Target the belief and the behavior will follow. The study found the opposite. People experience significantly greater reactance when someone tries to control what they think than when someone tries to control what they do. Thought control produced more anger, more hostility toward the source, and lower motivation to comply with the requested behavior, even when the behavior itself was unrelated to the belief. The researcher's explanation is precise. People treat their thoughts as more fundamentally their own than their behaviors. A threat to thought is a threat to the self in a way that a behavioral restriction is not. This finding has a direct implication for fact-checking, content moderation, and any intervention that tells people what to believe rather than what to do. Labeling a piece of content as misinformation does not simply reduce belief in it. In some cases, it increases belief in it, and increases hostility toward the institution doing the labeling. This is not a political observation. It is a mechanistic one. The same people who would comply with a behavioral restriction resist a cognitive one. Reactance is stronger when the target is the mind. The Roman historian Tacitus observed this in the year 109. Writing about the consequences of the Emperor Nero's censorship of books, he noted something that would take nearly 2,000 years to be formally studied. As long as possession of those writings was attended by danger, they were eagerly sought and read. When there was no longer any difficulty in securing them, they fell into oblivion. 2003. Malibu, California. Barbara Streisand sued a photographer for posting an aerial image of her estate online. The image had been downloaded 6 times. 2 of those downloads were by her own lawyers. The lawsuit was filed to remove the image from public access. News of the lawsuit spread. Within 1 month, the image had been viewed over 420,000 times. The lawsuit was dismissed. Streisand was ordered to pay the photographer's legal fees. The image became one of the most viewed photographs of that year. Mike Mosnick of Tector named the phenomenon in 2005 the Streisand Effect. The paradox where an attempt to suppress information causes it to spread further than it ever would have otherwise. The mechanism behind the Streisand effect is not mystery or irony. It is psychological reactance operating at scale. Before the lawsuit, the photograph was obscure. Nobody's freedom to access it had been threatened. There was nothing to restore. The lawsuit created the threat. The threat activated reactance in hundreds of thousands of people who had never heard of the photograph and would have had no interest in it under any other circumstances. In 2010, WikiLeaks released classified diplomatic documents. Several governments attempted to block access to the site. Traffic to WikiLeaks increased substantially following each government blocking attempt. Mirror sites proliferated. The documents spread faster through attempted suppression than they would have through free distribution. In 2020, Twitter blocked a news story about a political figure. Researchers tracked the sharing rate of the story before and after the block. The sharing rate increased from approximately 5,500 shares per 15 minutes to 10,000 shares per 15 minutes immediately after the blocking. The block nearly doubled the distribution rate. The platform removed the block the following day. By then the story had reached an audience it would never have reached without the intervention. In each case, the attempt to restrict access signals to a broad audience that something worth accessing has been restricted. The restriction is the advertisement. Researchers who have studied censorship Backfire identify specific conditions under which the Streisand effect is most likely to occur. The censor must be visible and perceived as powerful. The censored material must become publicly known. And the audience must perceive the censorship as unjustified or disproportionate. When those 3 conditions align, the attempt to suppress becomes the story. And the story spreads faster than the original content would have. Now, the architecture of reactance in your daily life. Not censorship at the scale of governments or platforms. The smaller, more frequent activations. Someone tells you what to do in a tone that implies you have no choice. You feel the pull to do the opposite, regardless of whether the instruction was reasonable. A doctor gives you specific dietary advice. A partner tells you to stop a habit. A manager assigns you a task with no explanation. In each case, the content of the instruction may be completely reasonable. The reactance is not responding to the content. It is responding to the perceived threat to autonomy. Brehm noted that reactance can be triggered even by implied threats. If a professor says do not eat in class, a student may infer that this also means no coffee, no water, no gum. The reactance extends beyond what was actually restricted. And research shows that observing someone else's freedom being restricted can activate reactance in you, even if your own freedom is untouched. This is called vicarious reactance. You watch a person being told what to think, or what they are not allowed to say, and you experience the motivational arousal even though the restriction was not directed at you. Marketing has understood this mechanism for decades. Limited time offer. Only 3 left in stock. Exclusive access. Members only. None of these phrases describe a product. They describe a restriction. And the restriction activates the same reactance mechanism that Brehm documented with candy bars in 1966. Waitlists for products that do not yet exist. Invite-only platforms. Password-protected content. Each one a deliberate activation of reactance to create perceived value. The product itself is often irrelevant to the desire. The desire is generated by the restriction. This is not manipulation in a loose sense. It is the direct and deliberate exploitation of a documented psychological mechanism. Here is the piece of this that is harder to accept than any other. Knowing about reactance does not protect you from it. The same pattern we observe with the Dunning-Kruger effect applies here. Awareness of a mechanism and immunity to a mechanism are not the same thing. Reactance operates before cognition. The motivational arousal activates faster than the reflective system that could evaluate whether the restriction is reasonable. You feel the pull toward the restricted thing before you have had time to ask whether you actually wanted it in the first place. And the fact that you now know that the opening of this video was designed to activate reactance did not stop it from activating. You still thought about what you wanted. You still felt the pull about exclusive content. That is not a failure of intelligence. That is the architecture of the mechanism. It does not route through the part of the brain that processes metacognitive awareness. What changes with awareness is not immunity. It is the speed at which you can catch the activation and ask the question that the mechanism never asks on its own. Was this freedom actually mine to begin with? Or did the restriction manufacture the sense that it was? Did I want this before I was told I could not have it? Or did the restriction create the desire entirely? These questions do not eliminate reactance. They create a small gap between the activation and the behavior. That gap is where agency lives. Now, the Zeigarnik loop. Zeigarnik discovered in 1927 that the human brain holds incomplete tasks in a state of active tension. An open loop that demands closure. The loop opened at the beginning of this video is now ready to close. You were promised an explanation for what happened when you were told not to think about what you wanted. Here it is. The instruction "do not think about something" is itself a restriction on cognitive freedom. It activates reactance. The restricted thought becomes more accessible, not less. This is sometimes called the white bear problem. Dostoevsky described it in 1863. Try not to think of a white bear, and you will think of nothing else. Daniel Wegner formalized this in 1987. Ironic process theory. The attempt to suppress a thought requires monitoring for that thought, which keeps the thought active. The claim about exclusive and limited content at the start of this video activated two mechanisms simultaneously. Reactance, through the implied scarcity and restriction, and Zeigarnik, through the open loop of a promise not yet delivered. Both mechanisms have the same function. They keep you engaged. One through arousal directed at restoring freedom. The other through cognitive tension directed at closing an open loop. Every platform that has ever held your attention longer than you intended has understood this, whether or not they named it. Autoplay is a Zeigarnik loop. The next episode is the open task. The cliffhanger is the incomplete thought. The notification is the implied threat that something is happening without you. Limited access is reactance by design. The exclusive community. The members-only content. The beta program. All of them restrictions crafted to activate the mechanism Brehm described in 1966. The restriction did not create the desire. You had the capacity for desire before the restriction arrived. The restriction revealed it. And then it amplified it. Every time. This is not the behavior of naive people falling for obvious tricks. It is the behavior of a brain doing exactly what it was built to do. The question Brehm's work leaves you with is not how to stop feeling reactance. That question has no useful answer. The question is whether you can create the gap between activation and action. Whether you can notice the pull before acting on it. Whether you can ask, in the moment of restriction, the one question the mechanism never asks. Did I want this before I was told I could not have it? The loop is closed. The exclusive content has been delivered. The Zeigarnik tension can release. And you now have a name for the mechanism that kept you here to receive it.